So, as y'all may have noticed, cancer rates have been on the rise, mood disorders, attention deficit disorder, depression, anxiety, um, all sorts of deformities, all sorts of birth defects, infertility, troubles with babies once they're born, autoimmune conditions, all of these things, skin disorders, all sorts of illnesses, chronic and otherwise, have been on the rise over the past 100 years. Heart disease, heart conditions, diabetes, obesity, all these things have been on the rise. And you'd think this wouldn't be the case because we have such an evolved and advanced medical system. So naturally, shouldn't have any of these issues. I mean, we also have advanced nutrition. You see all these nutrition studies coming out and all these medical studies and food studies coming out talking about the importance of eating the my plate or whatever the latest fad is, all this stuff. And it should be leading to better health for people. But what we see is that our generation, well, my generation, has some of the worst health of any generation previously. The next generation being born often has even worse health. They're being put on like one of my younger cousins who is just like a second cousin once removed, or my cousin had a baby and he was put on like this thing that they hooked up to his stomach to like feed him food because he just pukes up all the food he's being fed. I mean, they're also feeding him soy-based food, but these sorts of illnesses, these conditions, they're on the rise. And it's only getting worse with every generation. We're seeing cancer being much more prevalent in people under 50 now and under 40 than ever was previously seen. Obesity is happening at a much, much younger rate, a much younger age group than we've ever seen. We're seeing even kids as young as like 12, 14, and 18 having heart issues and heart defects, and like not even just heart defects, but like getting like heart attacks, having cardiac failure and stuff. And this is disturbing. I mean, why are we getting sicker with every progressive generation? These sorts of illnesses and problems we only used to see in much older people, in people who are in their 70s, 80s, 90s. But now we're seeing these issues of an aging population in younger people. And there's a few studies I want to share with you today that may shed some light on why this is the case. The first study is the Pottinger's cat study. And the Pottinger's cat study is a study done on cats back in, think about the 1920s, 1930s. And what they were doing was they're taking cats and they're experimenting on the difference between a raw diet and a cooked diet. They would take one group of cats, they fed them pasteurized milk and cooked meat, and they fed another group of cats raw milk and raw meat. And they observed the effects that these different diets had on the cats and had on the subsequent generations. So the cats fed even just the limited diet of raw milk and raw meat were completely fine and healthy. They experienced no health issues in the first generation, and all the subsequent generations were equally healthy. It's a great thing. It's like, wow, it's nice. These cats are healthy. In the group fed pasteurized milk and cooked meat, what we saw is, first of all, the first generation that was fed pasteurized milk and cooked meat had health issues that cropped up later in life. So, like the end of their life, they developed various issues and ended up dying. But that's not terribly uncommon. I mean, that's kind of what we see in our own society. You see people's health gets worse as they get older. Their hair falls out. They start having trouble walking, the various disorders, whatever. It's not whatever. I mean, it's a serious thing. This is not good. And there are populations of people where people live to 100, 110. They're still fathering children, walking around and doing stuff. It's not super common nowadays. It's much more common back in the day, but it is very possible to live to a ripe old age in robust health. So we should not accept poor health as we age. But first generation, it was nothing very dramatic. The second generation, they saw problems arising in middle age. They saw like hypothyroidism, cancer, these sorts of issues arising in middle age. The third generation of cats, they saw these problems arising in infancy, early age, and a large amount of the cats didn't even make it past 6 months in the third generation. There was no fourth generation. After 3 generations of feeding cats a cooked diet, pasteurized milk, and cooked meat, they were sterile. They were unable to reproduce. All the kittens, if they were able to conceive, died before they were able to be born. There was no fourth generation. And the third generation, second generation, we see a lot of symptoms of dental overcrowding, pinched, like crowded faces, and these sorts of things that are consistent with malnutrition that we see in humans. When humans do not have proper nutrition, they have spinal deformities, they have mood disorders. These cats were developing, the female cats would become hyper aggressive, the male cats would become very, very docile. Cats would also become aggressive and bite or attack the students who were conducting these studies, similar to the rats that we're going to talk about in the next study. I did look for photos of the cats. I could not find photos of the cats for the Pottenger's cat study, which is very disappointing because there's some for the rat study that you'll see. But essentially, they saw progressive and successive degeneration with each generation as they continue to feed them this cooked food diet. This isn't to say that cooked food diet is necessarily bad. It's certainly bad for cats, as the study proves, and that could be due to lack of enzyme activity, epigenetic factors, a variety of different factors. But this shows the progressive degeneration of a group fed the same diet, fed these processed foods. I mean, they're using condensed milk as well. So these are processed foods. They weren't just simply pasteurized milk, though there was a group fed pasteurized milk that did fare very badly as well. Very interesting study. There's a book written on it. I recommend everyone look into this. But the next piece of information that I want to share with you is the McCarrisson Rat study. So a McCarrisson Rat study was commissioned by the British Army, and they had a 4-star General McCarrisson. And they said to McCarrisson, okay, we're having an issue in World War I and World War II. 40% in World War I of young men and 50% of young men in World War II were not fit enough to serve in the army. And a majority of them could not be rehabilitated in time to serve. And this is a huge issue. I mean, they're young boys from the age of like 18 to 22, should be the most healthy, robust, vital group in a population, but they weren't fit enough to serve in the army. So they did a study on rats because rats age much quicker than humans. So in a few years, you can simulate many generations and many lifetimes of humans in rats, because like I think like one human year is something like 52 rat years. So in 1 year of feeding a rat a certain diet, you can see what that effect would have been had you fed a human that similar diet, as far as humans can be extrapolated to rats. So with rats, what they found was, well, the study that was conducted was they took the basic diet of the English, and then they took the other diet, which was the diet of, I believe, I think it was the Hunza. I think it was the Hunza in India. It was some people in northern India. And the British diet consisted of white bread, margarine, tinned meat, boiled vegetables, tinned jam, tea, and a little bit of milk, pasteurized milk. And then the Hunza diet, or diet of the northern Indians, India, the country, northern Indians, they were fed like whole wheat, butter, whole milk, fresh raw vegetables, fresh meat with the bone, fresh like fruit, and a much more robust, healthy diet. And as you can see, the difference in the effect on the rats is profound. So this is a rat fed the diet of, they call it the Sikh diet. And this is a diet, or rat fed the standard European diet. As you can see, the rats fed the Sikh diet have much sleeker coats. They're much bigger. and behaviorally they're much happier. The rats were in the same cage conditions and everything, but the rats on the right for the Sikh diet were much happier, much more friendly, much more playful. And the rats on the left were much more aggressive. They would bite the students that were conducting the experiment, and they actually resorted to cannibalism. The rats would start to cannibalize each other, as we see described in this section right here. So here it describes how they like the rats would begin to by the 16th day, the 16th 60th day of the experiment, 60th day, 2 months in, they began to kill and eat the weaker rats. Yeah. And then they actually dissected the rats afterward, and they found that the rats fed the European diet experienced gastrointestinal issues and lung issues, which were actually the major illnesses experienced by the British commoners during this time period. So right here, we see a very, very profound effect of foods on the health of rats. I mean, these are the genetically the same rats. This is one generation. This isn't even the Pottenger's cat study with multiple successive generations. This is one generation of rats. And you have like healthy, fat, sleek rats here with nice fur coats. And here you have like starved rats that are much smaller and much less robust. And this only happens in like 60 days. And this is a diet of white bread, margarine, tinned meat, boiled vegetables, tinned jam, tea, and sugar, little milk. Arguably, I think the margarine is really, really bad, obviously. And today people consume large amounts of vegetable oils, which that's what margarine is. But arguably, this diet we see is still better than the garbage that most people eat today. I mean, we don't, there's no Lay's potato chips here. There's no like Swedish fish, sour gummy worms, like high fructose corn syrup, Monster energy drinks, sodas with all sorts of garbage and preservatives in them. I mean, we just have tin meat, which is just meat that's been put in a can, then you heat it up a lot so that it kills all the bacteria inside and cooks the meat, and then you open it up later. So it's meat. I mean, it shouldn't be bad for you. But really what this is white bread, margarine, vegetable oils, tea, and sugar with a little bit of pasteurized milk, boiled like cooked vegetables, tin jam, and like cooked meat. So we're just seeing not even aggressive malnutrition. I mean, this is still malnutrition. It still resulted in all these issues, but it's not even aggressive malnutrition. This would be considered a good diet by today's standards, and it's not. I mean, like, look at this, just terrible. And really, like, the main difference you can see is fresh meat with the bone, raw vegetables, whole milk. I don't know if they pasteurized it, but whole milk, legumes, whole wheat, and really, I mean, the main difference is like raw vegetables, fresh meat, and butter instead of margarine. So this could be again enzyme activity. So in the Pottinger's cat study, we see cooked food versus raw food. Cook all the food, it kills all the enzyme activity in the food, especially pasteurized dairy. It's not the best for you. You really should be consuming raw milk because it has all the enzyme activity. Your body needs enzymes to process vitamins, to conduct vital bodily functions, to eliminate toxins, to assimilate food, to break down food, to do basically everything, to lower the energy threshold for vital chemical processes your body needs to stay alive to happen. And there are other studies that have been done that I'll cover later on enzyme activity and how when you deplete the enzyme reserves of an animal, what ends up happening is the animal becomes very, very sick and then quickly dies. The like vitality goes down, sexual function goes down, all this stuff goes down. And that's what we see in this diet is entirely a diet of cooked food, only cooked food, and vegetable oils. And then here we have fresh food, like fresh meat, Fresh meat will still be much higher in enzymes than completely preserved meat, simply because just cook it all the way through and leave it in a can for a year, 2 years, however long. Um, but the raw vegetables, fresh meat, and butter versus the margarine and cooked meat. I mean, it's really like interesting. Like, this is what I really want you guys to take away from this: is that it's not some aggressively terrible diet, and it still led to these horrible results. It still led to gastrointestinal diseases, all these issues. And like later on in the study, it writes down that the rats also experienced like loss of hair, dermatitis, endometriosis, reproductive issues, spinal deformities. And yeah, it's crazy. And that's simply with like what would today be considered a good diet. Like, that people are like, oh yeah, boiled vegetables, tin jam, tin meat, eat your bread and get your grains and your vegetable oils to get your cholesterol down. And this is what we see as the difference. And now imagine what's happening today, where you have people being fed and eating. I mean, not being fed, no one's forcing them to eat this way, but they're eating diets like, let's say, like a standard American breakfast. You wake up in the morning, you have your frosted flakes with oat milk. You have some white bread toast with margarine on it. You go have lunch, you have incredibly processed meat, maybe if you're even eating meat, but you have incredibly processed meat on more white bread, pasteurized dairy, some Lay's potato chips, and like a Coca-Cola. And then you come home for dinner and you have um more, like, you have, like, let's say, like pasta with like whatever sauce you put on it. That's a substantially worse diet, and that's still not even as bad as, like, you just go to the grocery store and you see what some people are buying. It's really crazy. I mean, I'll stop ranting on this, but this is really, this Pottinger's cat study and this like rat study, the McCarrisson rat study, really show the both the effects of malnutrition immediately, and then also the progressive effects of malnutrition or a maladaptive diet on successive generations. So that's ultimately why our generation is much sicker, and why we're getting generations that are getting progressively sicker. It's because the longer a group is fed these diets, the more these health issues accumulate, the more susceptible we become. There's many reasons for that. We get enzymes passed down to us from our parents, bacteria passed down to us from our parents, um, nutrition from our parents. I mean, like, when you're breastfed, like, you can only get nutrition from your mother that your mother has in her body. So you could be born with a less optimal nutritional profile and be born essentially malnutritioned because your mother had malnutrition and because her mother had malnutrition. It gets worse with every generation that this isn't corrected. And out the Pottinger's cat study, he did do a experiment to see if you could rehabilitate the cats. And he found that you could rehabilitate the cats at about the second or third generation. Um, but it took 3 generations for the cats to reach any sort of health resembling their previous state before being put on the all cooked diet, and they still had health issues. So really, that kind of reveals the depth of this problem that we're experiencing in our society today, and in our culture, in the world, in the industrialized world specifically, because we have multiple generations now. I think, let's say, I think we're on about the third or fourth generation of people who have been exposed to and fed this primarily industrialized diet. Not that our diets were even perfect beforehand, but really starting in the 1920s and 30s, you start to have like much more push of processed foods, pasteurized dairy, the 40s and 50s, margarine. And it didn't even start to get terribly extreme. I mean, up until the 70s, Burger King and McDonald's still cooked with beef tallow in their fryers instead of vegetable oils. So it hasn't been a complete switch. There was no point where it was a complete switch over from healthy foods to completely processed foods. But Now, I mean, since the 70s, it's been really intense. So now, I guess since the 70s, we're on the second, third generation. Oh, it's almost exclusively eating processed foods. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the results of that. We're seeing a massively increased obesity. We're seeing massively increased heart disease, neurological disorders, mood disorders, depression, anxiety, all these sorts of things. And it really comes from malnutrition. It comes from malnutrition and being fed a maladaptive diet, and then the cumulative effects of that over generations. I hope you all look into this and make some serious changes to your lifestyle based on this stuff for your sake and for your children's sake. Done.